equipment requirements for the body shops, and we really appreciate everyone changing around their schedules and making this webinar today. I'm Melissa Joles with RDA Impact, and we have Tony Nethery, owner of Blue Collar Consulting and Training. He's your presenter today. The presentation will take approximately 45 minutes, and we are recording it. The presentation will be posted on our website under the training videos, and if you have questions, you can type those in the chat box at the bottom right of your screen, and I'll give them to Tony as we receive them during the presentation. And also at the end of the presentation, we will we'll send Tony's information along with a copy of the presentation, so you have that, so you can reference it. Now I'll turn it over to Tony.
Hello everyone, this is Tony Nethery, and I appreciate you attending today. And for a short introduction, I'll just let you know a little bit about myself. I do have over 36 years of industry experience in the collision industry. I'm an ICAR instructor and an Automotive Management Institute instructor. I have worked directly with the EPA and OSHA for the state of Tennessee, and I'll say that with a certain amount of caution. When I say directly, I mean as a consultant with shops, but not as an employee of the state of Tennessee. So the things that I give to you today come from the standpoint of being on the side of the fence where I've been in the shop when OSHA's walked in, and with OSHA inspections and EPA inspections. And as a result, I've consulted for them some, helping shops meeting some of the new 6H laws and that type of thing. I'm the CEO of Blue Collar Collision Training, and we're a training organization that believes that training happens best when it happens in your place of business, whether that be through webinar or through where there's an actual visit. So if you're interested in working on any type of training, whether it be ICAR, AMI, OSHA compliance, estimating training, all types of training, we can provide that directly to you. So moving into the topic today, let's give you a little bit of an overview. We're going to talk about the required equipment for EPA and OSHA compliance, easy ways to organize that equipment and to manage it. Excuse me. We're going to talk about some of the different types of equipment that you might need. We will talk a little bit about some precautions with aluminum and some new isocyanate information, and we'll give you some resources that you might be able to use. For starters, let's talk about some of the misconceptions. Sometimes I've been asked if I'm a tech and I just buy my own equipment, I don't like what the shop provides. I don't like, I don't like the way it fits. I don't like the way it lasts, and that type of thing. And while it is okay for a tech to buy their safety equipment, it is not their responsibility. It is the responsibility of the business owner to provide any necessary equipment. And so I would make sure that I provide all of that equipment, and I would also make sure that the equipment that the techs might choose to buy for themselves meets the requirement. A second misconception is that fines come from what we do wrong. And while we may be fined for doing something wrong, typically fines that come from OSHA or EPA or any governmental agency is usually a result of a lack of documentation. The number one issue is not documenting what we do. It's not that we're doing the wrong thing most of the time. We just simply do not document what we have done. And then the last misconception that I've run into is that the inspectors that come out from OSHA or EPA understand our industry. And you would think that they would, but the reality is this. Body shops fall under general industry. So inspectors are the same ones that inspect large factories and manufacturing facilities that might be down the street from you. And so when they walk in, probably the first thing they're going to look for is just the obvious. And the issues that you and I, that we know are in our industry that we would expect them to look for is typically not the things that they look for. So a lot of times we spend our time and effort trying to be prepared for things that they may not even be looking for. So we said that the biggest fine that we usually receive, or the most often mistake that we make, is not having proper documentation. So let's talk a little bit about documentation and review what we really need to keep in our shop at all the time or in our business. First of all is a general safety manual. every business needs to be able to train their employees on the right to know laws. And because of that, you do need some general safety training and some general safety guidelines. You also need a hazardous communication program, and it does have to be a written program. You do have to have documents, and you do need to have documentation on when you've had meetings and when you've had training in those areas. And so you need to absolutely make sure that you have, like I say, a general safety manual, some general safety training, a hazardous communication program that covers the right to know laws. You also have to have a separate written respirator policy. That policy needs to cover all the information on respirators, who uses them, who wears them, how many hours a day they wear them, how often they're changed, how they're cleaned, how they're taken care of, where they're stored. All of that information has to be in the written respirator policy. And then also you need emergency procedures. Because of the nature of our industry, there's always a risk of fire and explosion. There's possibilities of accidents happening. So we need to have emergency procedures, and we have to have that in writing. It carries me back to a situation where I was actually in a shop, and an OSHA inspector came in. It was in the summertime in the state of Tennessee. Humidity was very high. Temperature is very high. It was probably close to 100 degrees that day. I'm standing in the middle of the shop, and I have 12 overhead garage doors standing wide open, just trying to keep the shop as cool as possible. And the OSHA inspector asked me, what is my emergency procedure plan? And I said, you mean to evacuate the building? And he said, yes. And I looked around at the doors. I really thought he was joking, because we had 12 foot overhead doors open in the building. And I said, well, we would go out those doors. And he said, well, who's going to call the fire department? Who's going to call roll to make sure everyone got out of the building? Where are you going to meet in the parking lot? So you do have to have an emergency procedure plan, and all those things need to be covered. So that brings us down to what the required equipment might be for the EPA and OSHA compliance. Once we have our written documents in place, we have all of our documentation in place, then it really does come down to having the proper equipment. And so some things that we need to look at is storage items, preparing for spills, being prepared for an accident, first aid readiness, having personal protection equipment, respiration filters and change-outs, and all that type of thing. We need eyes and ear protection, our hands and our bodies. How are we going to protect all the different areas that we have to work in? So to keep up with that and to avoid typical compliance failures and have all these things covered, here are some things that you probably will need. Anti-static cables, container labels, eye wash station, fire extinguishers, a fireproof cabinet, personal protection equipment, and a safety cabinet to keep all of these items in. So there has to be an easy way to organize the equipment and to store it to make sure that you're ready when these type of events come up. And so one of those things that we can do is have proper storage. You know, the old saying of having everything that you need and having it in its place kind of applies here. You need to have all the things that you need, and it's hard to keep up with that if you don't have a storage cabinet that's labeled and tagged to make sure that those items are always there. And then you do need to properly ground things, and you do need to have labeling. So the easy way to do this, as I said, is with a cabinet. And then there are some things that are not going to be kept within a cabinet. You might have cabinets that are just for flammable liquids. Some other things that you will need around your flammables would be static ground cables, fire extinguishers, funnels with a lid. Most of the time we have a funnel in our hazardous waste barrel. And more than once I've seen shops fined because if we have a funnel sticking in the top of a drum that we're pouring waste into, that's considered an open container if that funnel does not have a lid on it. So you will need the proper type funnel with a lid. Also, an area that shops are typically fined for or cited for is not having things properly labeled. So every product has to have a safety data sheet. Every product has to have a label on it. You can create a workplace label, which is a label that you make yourself. So if you're taking products that maybe you buy in a 5-gallon can or a 5-gallon container, and you're pouring it up into a gallon container or into smaller bottles or that type of thing, you can create your own labels on those products, and you would get the information to make that label off of a safety data sheet. You have to identify what the problem is, or what the product is, and you also have to identify any safety or hazardous information that needs to be on that label. So again, looking at the safety equipment, if we have a safety cabinet, what items go where in that safety cabinet, and let's talk about keeping it neat and how your jobber can help. And by having that cabinet, we would probably want the following items within that cabinet. To organize the equipment and put it all in a cabinet is one thing, but making sure that we have everything that we need is another. So here's the list, and this is not necessarily a complete list. I wouldn't say that this is everything that you will ever need and that OSHA wouldn't ask for anything else, but here are the items that I've typically seen that most shops probably need to have in a cabinet. An apron, and when we say apron, we're referring to a PVC type apron. More than once I've seen shops that were fined because they're detail technicians, sometimes maybe paint technicians, if they're using any type of acids. Oil cleaners is pretty common. They're actually supposed to be wearing a PVC apron, one that's that resists acids. Having some blank labels, so when a technician pours a product up, it's a good idea to have some blank labels there so that they can label a product. We don't typically think of a bump hat or a hard hat in a collision shop, but I have seen shops find anytime that you lift a vehicle on a lift, you have anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 pounds, 5,000 pounds in the air, and you have someone under that. Obviously, if the vehicle falls off of a lift, bump hat's probably not going to save your life, but it is very common for things, tools and parts off the vehicle to fall and hit people in the head. And so OSHA, remember, they come out of general industry. And in most manufacturing facilities, if you're working underneath things, they want you to have on a hard hat. And so they expect the same thing in a collision shop while we don't even think about it. And then dust masks for items that create particulates. An eye wash station. You're going to have to have an eye wash station somewhere in your facility, so you may want backup chemicals for the eye wash station. Emergency numbers. Safety data sheets do not contain local information. If people are in a habit of going to a safety cabinet when there's a problem, then that may be a great place to keep emergency numbers like the fire department, police department, doctors, ambulances, that type of thing. Fire extinguishers. Typically they're going to be hung around the shop, but there again, it is not an uncommon problem for technicians to remove a fire extinguisher and set it beside a vehicle while they're welding on it and those type of things, or to have one close by in the event that they need it. So having a backup fire extinguisher, if you will, near a safety cabinet is a great place to have one stored, if not in the cabinet itself. First aid kit, face shields, goggles, all the eye protection that you might use in your shop. Gloves, that might include latex gloves, light duty gloves, the heavier duty rubber type gloves or the nitrile gloves, lineman's gloves for working on the hybrids, a respirator or additional respirators, backup respirators, or maybe cartridges for the respirators that you use, and cleaner to clean those respirators before they're stored. Safety manuals and safety data sheets. You probably would want to have extra chute suits or Tyvek coveralls and shoe covers. It's a good place to keep a spill kit in case there's an accident in the shop, and even maybe even a backup welding helmet. Even though most technicians have their own welding helmets, it's a great place to keep a backup just in the event that OSHA comes in and you need to have proof that you have a good welding helmet that's in good working order. A good way to do this is to map your safety cabinet, or do a planogram if you want to call it that. And some examples might be on the top shelf or on the top of the cabinet you keep a spill kit. On the first shelf you might keep things like goggles and cleaners and ear protection. On the second shelf you might keep manuals, safety data sheets, first aid, eye wash, so forth and so on. So having the cabinet well organized and having it planned out, and maybe even on the inside of the door, have a planogram so that anybody can look in the cabinet, very quickly see if there's anything missing. So looking at the individual types of equipment, for spills, you need a spill kit, and we have an example here of the SAS 7750 Emergency Response Spill Kit. In the event of an accident, it's a good idea to have first aid handy and available. You can never have too much of that. You might even consider putting like a 25-person kit in your cabinet. You might consider smaller kits for each technician to have in their toolbox or near their workstation. Again, inspectors aren't necessarily familiar with the industry, so start with the obvious. When we look at the obvious, one of the first things that we typically think of in a body shop or in a collision shop would be respirators. So we need to have signs and policies on who wears them and where we keep them. And we do have different types of respirators that are available to us. Examples might be painters would use organic type respirators. Body techs would use organic respirators for some of the two-part products, and they would need particulate respirators for dust and for sanding fillers and that type of thing. And then often we forget that the guys that work in the detail shop use a lot of cleaners and acids and strong cleaners that require respirators. We want to keep those in mind as well. So you need to be sure and know how often they're issued, where they're stored, how they're cleaned, whether or not you use a half mask or the air supplied respirator. And just as a reminder, every technician that uses a respirator, and quite often there's a misconception that this applies only to painters, but this applies to anybody that uses a respirator, body men as well, would be they need a medical evaluation every 5 years, and they need to be fit tested at least annually. The fit test, you can actually conduct the fit test yourself. That is not something that you have to bring someone in from outside to do, although most of your suppliers, and that's a great benefit of having a good supplier. If you have a good supplier, you can actually have the supplier come in and do the fit test quite often. And the medical evaluations, there are places that you can do the medical evaluations online, or you can use your local physician. If you choose to do the fit test yourself, you will need a fit test kit. It's referred to as a Bitrix kit, and we have an example here of the SAS 9401. So looking at a few different respirators, there are the half mask type respirators, which are probably the most common that are disposable. There are some that you can actually replace the filters, and so we have some examples here. Making sure that you have the right respirator for the job that you're doing is the most important part, and like we said, there's basically two types, and that would be respirators that are good for organic vapors, and that's going to cover most all of your paint products. Organic respirators, one of the things that you can look for, somewhere on the filter there will be a black band around it. If you look at the example there on the right, you can see that it has a black band around the label part of the respirator there. If it has a black band, that indicates it's an organic respirator. If it doesn't, then it's not an organic respirator, and it probably will not protect you from paint fumes. And then we have the dust type respirators that just cover particulates from sanding body fillers and that type of thing. That brings us to eye protection, and first of all, in the event that there's an accident, we would need the ability to wash a technician's eyes. And I have been in this situation where I had someone have a large dose of paint thinner and be splashed into their eyes. And I was very fortunate there was an eye wash station close by, and it didn't do any damage. And typically, if you read your safety data sheets, it'll say that you need to wash their eyes with solution for probably 15 minutes. And so having a good eye wash station is important. And you may have a permanent station that's actually plumbed into the building. The challenge with the permanent station is it's usually out in the shop, and it's hard to keep it clean, and it's hard to keep it unobstructed. It's just real common to see eye wash stations in shops that have hoses hanging over them, and it's a great place to hang an extension cord and all the things that you do not need to have in the way in the event of an accident. So permanent stations are good as long as they're kept clean and unobstructed. And then we see quite a few of the portable type stations. The problem with a portable station where it has a holding tank is that you have to change the saline of the water monthly, and you have to maintain a schedule and document that. Because of that, I really do like the thoughts of having personal eye wash where each technician or every technician can have their own, and you can also keep extras in the safety cabinet. And here are examples of the portable eye wash station, and you can buy the saline products to put in those. Or on the right side there, we have the SAS eye wash products, and those are inexpensive enough and they're small enough that each technician can have one in his toolbox or in his own work area. And I think that is probably, in my opinion, one of the better ways to do it, but that is strictly my opinion. Besides the ability to wash technicians' eyes in the event of an accident, the best prevention is to have prevention, and the way to do that is have plenty of safety glasses, face shields, goggles for your painters, welding helmets, and we did list here the different shades that's required. Shade 9 lens for plasma cutting, the shade 10 is the minimum for MIG welding. However, aluminum has such a bright flash that it's probably a better idea to use a shade 11 when welding aluminum. There are other, all types of eye protective equipment that's available to us today, to the point that we are even becoming stylish, and technicians can express their own personal style. So you may work with your local supplier to determine what type of safety equipment that you want to buy for your technicians and what you want to provide maybe in your safety cabinet. And if they choose to become a little more stylish, you might allow them to do that on their own, but you would want to make sure that what they're using is quality eye protection. One of the areas that's quite often overlooked in a collision facility is protecting our hearing. Most every technician that's been around the body shop for 10, 15 years probably has some hearing loss, because we really do not stress hearing protection enough. Typically, if you're standing within 1 meter, a little less than 3 feet of someone, and you can't hear on a conversation at a normal voice level, then that's an indication that it's too loud in that area, and that you should do what you can to reduce the noise, and then beyond that, make sure that your technicians are wearing hearing protection. It does depend on the intensity of the noise as well as the duration of the noise. So it's how loud is it, and how long do I have to listen to it? And from the chart that we've got on the screen, gives you some ideas, but basically this, a hammer banging on sheet metal is usually at around 100 decibels. 100 decibels can only be listened to for a couple hours before it starts doing severe damage to your hearing. So obviously most body shops, the guys probably need to be wearing ear protection at all times. And there are a lot of options with hearing protection. We have the ear plugs, the disposable type plugs. You may have the full headsets. A lot of different options for wearing hearing protection. And then that comes to protecting the thing that we use the most is our hands. Probably not much we can do to protect our minds these days, but protecting our hands, that's our most often used tool. in collision repair. So there are disposable gloves, chemical resistant gloves, gloves that protect you from cuts, voltage resistance gloves, temperature resistance gloves protect you from heat, and then just general work gloves. So some ideas would be latex for body technicians just when they're working with two-part products. Painters may even wear latex type gloves when they're just spraying paint. Once you step up to submersing your hands into different cleaners, paint gun cleaners and acids, detail acids, that's when you want to step up to a rubber or a nitrile type glove. A Class 0 lineman glove for working on hybrid vehicles. Those typically come with leather covers because even a pinhole in a rubber glove can actually allow enough voltage in to kill you. Mechanics gloves for handling sheet metal, and then leather for welding, especially with aluminum, because heat transfers through the aluminum so efficiently that panels will become very hot when you're welding on them. So you probably need a little more hand protection for welding aluminum than you have maybe dealt with steel in the past. So for hand protection, we've got a few examples there. Things like the 6417 electric service gloves, and then the newest gloves that we have out is the Astro Grip gloves that give us a little better grip when we're using them. At the same time, they're still considered a disposable glove. And then that brings us down to protecting the rest of the body. Things like the bump hat, as we spoke about earlier, boots. When we're working in the detail shop in acids and cleaners, someone's feet's going to stay wet all day, then they do recommend boots. Things like shoe covers, just to keep, the idea with the shoe covers probably more than just protecting our feet is the idea that once we come out of the booth, we can take those shoe covers off and dispose of them so that we don't track the isocyanates and the paint and the hazardous chemicals into other parts of the facility. And then obviously to protect the rest of our body, because anywhere that we have pores in our skin, which is for sure our arms and the top of our head, we really do need to wear a paint suit or a Tyvek type suit to cover those areas. We talked about aluminum a little bit already with the welding and protecting your eyes with a little bit of additional eye protection. We do need to remember that aluminum reacts to other metals and causes galvanic corrosion. And so to protect ourselves and the consumer, we need to be conscious of that. Also, aluminum particles can be explosive. So that is why a separate work area is required between the combination of the explosiveness and the combination of the galvanic corrosion. Aluminum is an irritant. It is not considered toxic so far as we know, but it is an irritant, so you should always be wearing a respirator. And when you think about the fact that fragments from aluminum will contaminate steel, fragments from steel will contaminate aluminum, we may want to wear gloves and hand protection and change it when we go from one type of metal to the other so that we don't cross-contaminate vehicles. The same respiratory equipment is probably okay to use. You're probably not going to carry enough fragments from one to the other. But it's not a bad idea to use disposable dust masks so that you can change dust masks as well. And then again, just to prevent galvanic corrosion and prevent cross-contamination, it might not be a bad idea to wear a Tyvek suit when you're working on aluminum. And then if you go out into the shop, you can remove the Tyvek suit so that you don't carry aluminum particles in your clothing out to the other vehicles. So there's a lot of new isocyanate information, and we're finding out that basically that we can more or less get secondhand isocyanates. So we want to be careful about carrying that into the other parts of the business. That's why we would probably want to wear the appropriate coveralls and remove those when we leave the paint booth. Protect all the porous parts of your body. Make sure that your respirators are NIOSH approved through the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. You will want to use an organic respirator or a fresh air respirator And remember that all catalyzed products contain isocyanates. So there is a level of isocyanate in any product that's catalyzed. It is a nerve toxin, and we don't need to breathe it, and we do not need to get it on our skin. Some of the other resources that's available to you is OSHA has some information on their website, and there's also an SCRS link. And we want to thank Mr. Brandon Thomas of GMG and ViralSafe, who is also an RDA partner, for putting some information together for us to have at our disposal. So to completely protect ourselves from the isocyanates, full hoods, covering our head, covering our body, covering our hands, complete cover is the only way to protect ourselves from isocyanates. So let's review the safety cabinet just for a moment. Items that we might want to keep in the cabinet: buff hat, an apron, dust mask, blank labels, eye wash, emergency numbers, fire extinguisher, first aid kit, gloves, face shield and goggles, respirator and cleaners, safety manuals, safety data sheets, a chute suit, shoe covers, spill kits, and welding helmets. If we have all of these items in a cabinet, the beauty of having that cabinet is when OSHA comes in, the first thing they're going to want to see is those documents that we spoke about at the beginning. Once those documents are in place, then they're going to want to go through our shop and inspect our shop. As much as they're looking for the things that we did wrong or that we're doing wrong, they're also looking for the things that we are doing right. And one of the things that we can do that deters a lot of problems beyond having the documentation is to have all of the necessary safety equipment and have it in good working order and having it where it's available. And if we have safety cabinets, whether we have one or more, that is a good idea. I personally believe that one cabinet could probably be set up and designed so that maybe every 5 to 10 technicians that you have, I personally like the idea of maybe about every 5 technicians having a cabinet. You may have a separate cabinet for body men and separate cabinets for painters. You may have a cabinet that's built just around the idea of the detail department. So you can actually set your cabinets up depending on what part of the shop it's in, and you might not have to have every product in each cabinet. But whatever you set up, if you set those cabinets up and you put the necessary products for that work area in that cabinet, if you'll work with your supplier, the suppliers that are members of Refinish Distributors Alliance are great at getting you all of the products that you need, helping you get it in a cabinet, getting it organized, and helping you maintain that cabinet. And if you do that, then when OSHA walks in, you're not caught without any of the things that you need. That brings us down to just general housekeeping. You never know who's going to visit your shop. It might be OSHA, it might be EPA, it might be your mother. But at any rate, having a clean shop is safe, it's healthy, it's the right thing to do, and it makes working conditions better for everybody, and it makes you more productive. So keep your shop just in good, clean order, clean everything up, organize it. Documents updated and in place is crucial. And just make sure that you make it all look good. Because, again, the inspectors typically are not from our industry. And because they're not from our industry, if they walk in, you have the right documents, you have the right safety equipment, and everything is clean and in good working order, chances are they're going to leave and you're not going to get fines. So just a little bit of time cleaning, organizing, and being proactive can make all the difference in the world.
Tony,
I'd like to thank today SAS for providing most of the products and the images we used in the presentation. SAS is an official manufacturer partner with RDA. They provide our members with a valuable resource for quality safety products. So be sure and ask your distributor how they can help you keep your safety cabinet properly stocked and get it set up. Also would like to thank Melissa for hosting the webinar, and I'd also like to thank Georgia Thorson for all of her help in putting the PowerPoint presentation together. And besides that, I personally would like to thank you for attending today, and keep blue collar in mind. We are training specialists that work in the areas of OSHA and EPA assistance. We do estimating training, marketing, social media planning, production process improvement, training, planning, and assistance for ICAR, and the training programs that you want to accomplish. And we also work with materials management assistant to help you find ways to be a little more profitable on your materials. So when it comes to training in a body shop, that's what we do, and that's who we are, blue collar.
Tony, we
Again,
have a question.
my name's Tony Netter. I'd like to thank you for your time today. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer those.
We do. We have a question.
Okay.
One of the questions is, are the shops required to have a printed copy of the SDS sheets, or is an electronic file okay?
I'm typically asked that question most every time I do a presentation. And the reality is, I don't know that it's written anywhere that says that it cannot be electronic. Here's the challenge. Every time that I have known OSHA to walk into a repair facility and do an inspection, they will typically pick out the person that they think is the least likely to be able to take them to a safety data sheet. And they will typically walk up to that individual and ask them what product they are using and is it hazardous. And the technician will typically say yes. And then they will say, well, will you get me the SDS sheet for this product? And if they happen to walk up to the detail guy or to a body tech or to the janitor, and the safety data sheets are on a computer in the paint mixing room, and they cannot access it, then you will be fined. And that is why I personally like to see a printed copy, a hard copy, that can be put in a cabinet, that can be put on display so that everybody can put their hands on it. That's why I recommend having maybe even a separate cabinet of safety products that's really kind of a show product. You know, it's here's all of my safety equipment. We keep this cabinet here all the time. It may not even be a cabinet that your technicians work out of. It may be, you know, the show cabinet, for lack of a better terms. And because of that, I like to have a set of hard copies on safety data sheets. Although most paint manufacturers will tell you the electronic is good enough, and it is, provided everybody in the building can access it. So the challenge with that is sometimes we have technicians that maybe are not, they may not be computer literate, and they may struggle or may not have the passwords or the access codes to get into certain computers. And so you do have to have them. If you're going to do electronic, it has to be in a place that everyone can access it at any time. And that is the challenge with electronic, in my opinion.
Okay, we have another question. Is OSHA pushing for the breathable paint suits only?
Not that I have been told. Again, you have to remember in most states that OSHA is a federal organization, but every state can add to. They cannot take anything away from what the federal level requires, but they can add anything to it that they want to. So in the event that in some state somebody happened to decide that that's better, they could make that the requirement in that state. But at a federal level, so far as I know, you just need to have protection from isocyanates, and you know, any Tyvek suit's going to do that. But at the same time, you know, you want to do what's best for your technicians, because in the long run, you know, you don't want to end up in a situation where you're held liable for something and you can't say I did everything that could be done. So the best suits that you can buy, in my opinion, are the thing to do. But the only requirement is that you have protection. And it kind of goes back to, you could apply that same thing to respirators. You can say, is the disposable respirator good enough, or should I use the fresh air supply type respirators? I would use whatever I can get my technicians to wear and wear correctly. But, the reality is the guys that come in and do the inspections, most of the time they're from general industry. So they probably don't know themselves what you really need. So I would make sure that I have the best that I could have, I guess would be the way I would look at that.
Okay. Any other questions? We will send Tony's information out, and I will send a copy of the presentation to everyone. So if you do have a question at a later time, you can certainly follow up with Tony, and he'd be happy to answer your questions later. So with that, I don't think we're going to, if anybody doesn't have any questions, I guess that'll conclude the webinar, and continue to send us your suggestions, and we'll be in touch with upcoming training opportunities. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.